I've seen a lot of women in peril as a horror movie lover. From the Saw series, to Wolf Creek, to Terrifier, to the Poughkeepsie Tapes, to the Human Centipede, to Bone Tomahawk, to 120 Days of Sodom and beyond, I've seen a pretty broad spectrum of depictions of violence against women. Sometimes violence is there to raise the stakes. Sometimes it exists to facilitate broader plots of transformation, and sometimes the violence is the plot. Violence is both a visual spectacle and a tool used to serve a purpose in horror filmmaking, usually to disgust, to frighten, to upset, and different people have different levels of what they can tolerate. Some love the visual effects of a gory scene and the artistic exploration of the limits of the human body. Some people just do not get the point, or they find it icky. And many people reject fictional violence against women, including in horror fiction. Depictions of violence can be exhausting in a world where violence is so normalized. We have by no means solved real violence, which can often make it feel like fictional violence is the continuation of that indulgence, the normalization and the fetishization of hurting women. In some cases, these judgments are absolutely correct. When you're watching a film, you occasionally get a sense that this is tickling the director's pickle in a particular unignorable way, usually in the way that shots linger, the way things are framed, or the way that the actors are directed to behave. Movies like the Poughkeepsie Tapes and Wolf Creek are pretty abhorrently guilty of this, but unlike other people, I don't get that same feeling about movies like Terrifier, even if scenes of violence, often against women, are extremely gratuitous and dragged out. A lot of people cite a scene in the first movie where a woman is hung upside down, naked, and sawed in half as a kind of Freudian metaphor for sexual violence. I'm not being facetious when I say that I totally see where they're coming from. The image is very stark, a man sawing a woman in half, but I personally don't agree. If I saw the same scene in another movie, my opinion might be different, but I think Terrifier is okay. The emphasis is always on Art the Clown in that series, the movie's beloved icon and antagonist. And these movies work very hard to push the limits of visual effects, gore, and min-maxing fainting audience members. Unlike other movies like Wolf Creek, where the focus is always on how helpless and miserable and prolonged the suffering of the female victims is, Terrifiers isn't really on the victim's suffering so much as it is on pushing the boundaries of horror, or trying to get Art the Clown in Dead by Daylight. Do I think the first movie's cast is a bit too female heavy? Sure, yeah. I won't argue with you on that, and I think the writers recognised this too. In the second movie, they added a female protagonist who escapes Art, beating him at his own game, and they introduce Art's boss, a 10-year-old girl clown who clearly unnerves him. Still, at the end of the day, just because a woman is the subject of violence in a piece of media doesn't mean that media is necessarily intended to arouse the viewer. The sad fact of the matter is that sometimes there will be a guy who beats off to it anyway. Regardless of intent, regardless of sensitivity, regardless of flesh shown or punches pulled, there will be someone out there who is aroused by it. No matter how you depict a scene of violence, it will still align perfectly with the kind of material that titillates the wrong kind of person. It's one of the most unfortunate realities facing women in art. There is no way to perform or exist in fiction and not be the subject of a self-beating. Do I think some unwashed teenager is going to crank it to that master and servant scene from the Poughkeepsie Tapes? Yes, absolutely. Do I think the Poughkeepsie Tapes is a good film? No, it's an overhyped wankfest. Does that mean I think we shouldn't make movies like the Poughkeepsie Tapes? No. There was a time when an unwashed teenager cranked it to My Little Pony and we called them bronies and sent them on their way. Some people think Lolita is a tragic love story. Metal Gear Solid 5's Quiet's torture sequence is absolutely intended to tickle the wrong guy's pickle. It is an exercise in voyeuristic torture framed with an atmosphere of icky, will he won't he threats of sexual violence. If we allow media to exist depending on whether it is the subject of male arousal, we are not going to have a lot of media left. Some people out there are just sick. There's a German man on Twitter who has sex with hoovers. For some guys, the world is a tapestry of things that they can put their willy in. In my humble and tiny opinion, it is better to look at art on a case-by-case basis and appreciate that we won't always come to the same conclusion. I felt like Terrifier was okay, but I imagine that a few of you in the comments will disagree with me, some vehemently, and I think that's alright. I've come to terms with it. The spectrum of our opinion is defined by the spectrum of our experiences, and one person's okay is another person's deeply frankly upsetting. I won't argue with any of you unless you are going to claim that the Poughkeepsie Tapes is good, in which case I will label you class dunce and you can sit in the corner. I could talk all day about which horror movies I feel are fetish and which horror movies I feel are not. I know that context matters, and the act of watching violence in a film is already an act of voyeurism. The two are inseparable, but violence against women is not inherently misogynistic or fetishistic, and I'm kinda tired of watching people pretend that it is. Which brings us to Martyrs. No, wait, I said Martyrs, not Daters. Ah well, since we're here, let me talk about Brilliant. As someone who's been taking on some extra data courses for her career, not this YouTube career, the actual one, I have found Brilliant to be absolutely indispensable in helping me understand data science. Most courses just teach you the coding language SQL, which is all well and good, SQL's very useful, but practically speaking are not comprehensive enough for real-world data applications. I know it sounds a bit obvious, but your standard data courses don't really cover graphs or data visualization or that kind of crossover between data and maths, and that's why I love Brilliant, because that is exactly what they do. Not only do Brilliant's courses offer a rich and all-encompassing view of subjects like data science, computer programming, maths, and machine learning, but they are designed to be accessed by all ages and ability levels. Kid or adult, generalist or specialist, novice or expert, you'll find something that challenges you. Learn by solving problems, not watching videos. To learn for free on Brilliant for a full 30 days, go to brilliant.org/merkkk, scan the QR code on screen, or click the link in the description. Brilliant's also given our viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to everything on Brilliant. Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's get back to it. Martyrs is a 2008 French movie by Pascal Laugier. Pascal's an interesting guy. Unlike other extreme horror movie directors that I won't name, like Tom Six, Pascal is stunningly well-adjusted despite his craft. He finds modern horror to be too cynical, too self-aware, too self-defeating. He sees a genre that already knows it isn't being taken seriously and then doesn't even try to make good quality stories. A lot of horror movies are propped up on interesting but half-baked concepts, overloaded with substanceless visual effects, and never given the attention to detail they deserve. Stories become secondary to empty jump scares and pointless gore. They are often marketed on disgusted word of mouth, which means that expectations are usually higher than what the final product can deliver. Think about the amount of times that you've seen a movie marketed on the amount of people that threw up during the previews, and then you watch it and you're like, that was okay, I suppose. Loads of these movies end up getting really low ratings because the execution never meets the expectation. I like Pascal because he prioritized telling a good story first, an earnest, actual story, not a self-aggrandized what-if concept. And to him, gore and special effects were a tool he used to make that happen, and make it happen well. Yeah, Martyrs is a really good film, and I highly recommend it, so let's talk about why. Conceptually, Martyrs is simple. It is a movie of two halves marked by a twist many of us will be aware of before going into it. It's not unique in the sense that, like other extreme horror movies, it tends to be marketed by word of mouth, finding its place on various top 10 most disturbing movie scenes lists, and you'll likely have it advertised to you by people who are recounting its most infamous scene. A scene where main character Anna is skinned alive and left suspended in a bath of water until she dies, by a company who believe that doing so will allow her to see and share the secrets of the great beyond with them. The first half of the movie is about the other main character, Lucy. In the opening scene of the film, we see her younger self escaping some kind of torture slaughterhouse. In an interview with Canadian writer Michael Mann, Pascal specifically cited Eli Roth and Hostel as being an inspiration for him, and that inspiration is visible from the very first moments of Martyrs. Lucy is moved into some nun-run orphanage where she meets Anna, but she never escapes her torment. Lucy is haunted by the ghost of a woman she was unable to save during her escape. A woman covered in scars with milky eyes whose mind is so broken that she cannot communicate beyond guttural growls and screeches. At first, you know this woman is a dream, and then there's a period where you're not quite sure actually whether she's real, and then you realise, yes, she is in Lucy's mind. She is the manifestation of Lucy's guilt, and while Lucy sees this woman attacking her, the reality is that she's actually just in the midst of a psychotic episode, cutting herself. In In this half of the movie, Lucy seeks out the family who tortured her in that slaughterhouse, traces them to their home, and kills all of them, including their children. This half of the movie ends in Lucy's death. She kills herself by cutting her arms open, seeing the ghost woman doing it, and jumping out of the window. The second half of this movie is the, "Oh, you weren't joking" half. Anna, who has come all this way to help her friend out of a sticky situation, is, for whatever reason, trying to clean up the evidence of Lucy's murder, despite Lucy now being dead. Instead of leaving the scene, Anna roams the house for a few hours, continues to clean the place of blood and bodies, and finds a locked woman in the basement. This is the part of the film where you're shouting at her to run away, but obviously she doesn't. This is a movie after all. In the basement, Anna meets her own scarred woman, and this represents the way that she now begins to understand that what Lucy went through can't be fixed by love or medication or therapy. She saves her own scarred woman and then watches her perform the same self-abuse that Lucy performed, unable to communicate. Now that Lucy is dead, Anna fully understands the problem, and if she didn't believe Lucy before, she definitely does now. It turns out that the dead family were part of some kind of pseudo-cult organization, who now walk in, find everyone dead, kill the scarred woman, and decide that Anna will make a fantastic substitute. Anna is locked up in the same kind of room that young Lucy had been locked up in. She is sat on the same chair, and she is subjected to the same treatment: hair shaving, beatings, and force feeding. When she is sufficiently broken, mentally and physically, she is skinned alive to become a martyr. So, is it good? Yeah. I think Martyrs is a brilliant film. It is nowhere near as extreme as all the think pieces on it led me to believe it would be. And I think that the discussions of this film's extremity actually really overshadows its good qualities. Yeah, you know, it's got a skinned woman in it. That's quite obscene. But it's also a fantastic depiction of female suffering for the greater good, the true weight of trauma on a broken mind, and the interchangeability of tyrants, large and small. Although Pascal was clearly inspired by Hostel, his own work deviates very hard. In his own words, "I'm French and my sensibilities are different. I was interested in using the imagery of torture porn and turning it into something different. Yes, shocking, but still disturbing for a horror audience." Now, I haven't seen Hostel in about 10 years, so from what I remember, you basically watch a carousel of imprisoned tourists get tortured to death by rich losers in a fictitious town in Slovakia. It's got the Saw recipe, where you take it in turns to watch each victim's torture and eventual demise in lots of creative ways, one at a time, with a loose story hanging over the top, like putting fairy lights on a combine harvester. These days, and I mean 2026, it does feel like there's a certain irony to a US-born man using Eastern Europe as a setting for US-based atrocities. Not that Eastern Europe doesn't have atrocities, it's certainly got plenty of them, but the idea that a US billionaire would need to commute to Slovakia to slit a young woman open has become a bit laughable in today's context. The cannibal scene feels like a drop in the water these days. Like a cannibal eating a grown man from the feet up. Yawn. I don't blame Eli Roth for this, by the way. I'm not trying to say it in like a woke scold way. I just baffle at the constantly developing lens of real-life atrocities that make this fiction so nitpickable in retrospect. Unlike a lot of extreme horror, you might be surprised to hear that there's a particular restraint to Pascal's work. There are no guts in Martyrs, really. As iconic as the phrase is, the violence of Martyrs is literally skin deep. We have beatings and slashings and gunshots and flayings, but you never see a gut. In fact, the skinning scene is incredibly scaled back and relegated to a before and after shot. You see Anna get strapped into the contraption, the doctor grabs a scalpel, presses it to her skin, she winces, and then in the next scene she is completely skinned, head to toe. If there's a director's cut out there with more of this scene in more detail, I couldn't find it. Pascal walks a delicate line between intentionally offending and disturbing his audience, and still telling a coherent story with points and themes and symbolism. Pascal said, "As a fan of the genre, I was very tired of horror films that said nothing to no one, trying to express something more real, the kind of reality that society doesn't want to reveal." You hear these kinds of speeches a lot from extreme horror directors, usually when they're justifying people being sewn anus to mouth, or an abundance of voyeuristic rape scenes, or pretending that they're trying to raise awareness by just doing the thing again. But this didn't really cringe me out. As we'll discuss soon, Pascal's depiction of society's entitlement to female female suffering, the way that society would rather grieve a woman than save her, is really inspired, and its depiction in Martyrs is brutal and memorable in ways that I've seen in no other film. While movies like Hostel can carry allegorical parallels to things like the upper class being evil, or Terrifier's art can be brutal, or the Poughkeepsie tapes' serial killers exist, many of them rarely step beyond that, and often the allegory is flimsy and undercooked. Pascal's work doesn't just say the upper class are evil, it also says women are sacrificed for the entitlement of uncaring religious and political systems that they have no stake in nor awareness of, in ways that apply to many discussions. Martyrs is explicitly inspired by Catholicism, highlighting a systematic structure that sees women as pure vessels for whom suffering is an expected part of life. Anna's appearance in a white blanket, mimicking the Virgin Mary in an exhausted, bloody reality, is a prime example of the intentional overhanging religious symbolism. Even beyond this, there are so many parallels to draw between Martyrs and the expected social suffering and martyring of women in situations where said martyring is completely avoidable. For example, there are discussions to be had about reproductive rights and freedom of choice, whether it's better to stand by and watch women die and even further torture her in her final moments for the sake of your own ideals, when you have literally no skin in the game. The fact that a much older woman spearheads this organization is also a huge factor in this. It's like older female politicians who turn around after decades of healthcare and rights and then strip them away from younger women now that they're safely over the finish line. I found this movie very profound. I felt very understood in ways that no other extreme horror movie has ever made me feel. Not only are women the protagonists, but their struggle is immensely relatable on an allegorical level, and I mean an allegorical level. I don't think I've ever been skinned, and I can't relate to that part. The violence done to these women never felt like it was there to be enjoyed. It was there to be uncomfortable, to represent something meaningful, to show the impact of these organizations and attitudes by way of physical metaphor. Yeah, like we said, this is gonna be someone's material, but what am I supposed to do about that? That one adult man wrote himself into the Powerpuff Girls reboot as Blossom's crush. Like, you can't have shit in female-centered fiction. Now that we've had our overview discussion, let's start digging into the themes. The biggest and boldest theme in Martyrs is the theme of trauma. Although we see her escape and she confides in Anna about her experiences, no one really knows what happened to Lucy except Lucy. As we learn, neither the doctors nor Anna actually believe her, so she's right to be distrustful and refuses to fully let go of what she's running from. Lucy's trauma is represented by the scarred woman that terrorizes her throughout her life. During her escape, she overhears screaming and goes to investigate, finding a woman chained to a chair. The woman reaches for her and cries and begs, but Lucy can't stop to free her and she has to leave her there. The woman is never found or saved. By the time anyone comes to investigate the scene of the crime, everything has been tidied away and the woman is likely dead. One of the first times Lucy encounters this woman that we know of is during a meeting Anna has with the police, or the organization pretending to be the police, who knows, where they try to discern what Lucy has told her. The nurse comes in to tell them that Lucy wasn't present for lunch. Anna goes upstairs and checks under the bed first, indicating that this is a common occurrence, but then finds Lucy in the bath covered in slashes. Lucy protests, "Don't tell anyone, it wasn't me," as Anna holds her. At first, this seems like a case of self-harm, and it sort of is, but as we learn, it comes about as a result of a deeper state of psychosis. When Lucy self-harms, she doesn't realise that she is the one doing it. She sees visions of the scarred woman cutting her. To her, the ghost is very real, and the ghost is hurting Lucy as revenge for how she left her at the facility. We see the ghost for ourselves in the next scene, as it terrifies Lucy in her dreams. At this point, it's obvious that she is a nightmare. The next time we see her, it's not that obvious, because it happens in isolation 15 years later. After killing every member of the household that terrorized her, Lucy sees a naked, scarred woman crawling around the kitchen. She holds up her bloodied hand and says, "It was me, I killed them," to reassure the ghost that she won't suffer anymore, that her torturers have been put to death. But the ghost attacks her regardless. She slashes her back and stabs stabs her fingers despite Lucy's begging, and Lucy comes to realise that revenge has not quelled the ghosts of her past, it has only made them angrier. Lucy knows that the woman isn't real in a sense, but we don't know whether she thinks the woman is a ghost or whether she knows that she is a hallucination brought about by her intense trauma. The mademoiselle behind the operation will tell Anna, when you push these women far enough, they begin to see things that don't exist. But this terminology is really specific. She doesn't say things that aren't real, and that kind of stuck out to me, that detail. The woman might not exist, but whether or not she is real is not something that the cast of characters in this film are clear on their opinion about. And even if they confirmed their beliefs out loud, they are too unreliable as individuals to be taken as gospel. There are suggestions about Lucy's understanding, though. During a flashback, when she recalls her head being slammed backwards, we see that in the present day, she slams her own head backwards with her own hand. She runs to Anna and says, "She's here." Anna responding, "I know," and Lucy wants to leave the house as soon as possible before the ghost lady comes back, indicating that she believes, in some sense, that the ghost lady is stuck in one spot or can be physically left behind. The specific corporeality of the woman is a great metaphor for the way that Anna neither truly understands Lucy nor fundamentally believes her. She hears about the ghost from Lucy, who confides in her and no one else, but she can't see the ghost. She allows Lucy to go and investigate the family by herself, and she is shocked when Lucy just murders them all. When the mother of the family wakes up, Anna tries to smuggle her out of the house while Lucy is sleeping. Lucy catches them and demands to know why Anna is helping the woman that tortured her. Anna basically says, "Because I think she's innocent," and this betrayal is enough to send Lucy into a suicidal rage. She hands the ghost woman a box cutter and, in the most squeamish scene of the movie by miles, allows the woman to slice her arms and throat open. I like the ghost woman because the implication that she is tied to this house and her uniquely aggressive attacks on Lucy that happen while she is in the home could be interpreted as her ghostly way of trying to get Lucy to leave before the organisation comes back and finds her. The interesting thing about this is that the trauma is immediately passed to Anna. Shortly after Lucy's death, Anna uncovers a passage behind a cabinet that leads downstairs. It is here that she finds her own scarred woman, almost totally identical to the scarred woman that followed Lucy, and this physical union with the reality of Lucy's trauma is a moment where Anna goes from concerned disbelief to total and miserable understanding. She sees this and she completely gets it. She believes Lucy one moment too late, as she is then faced with physical evidence of her trauma manifested before her. The appearance of this woman is a miserable omen of Anna's fate. What I liked about this movie in particular is how it flips gender on its head. Women are the victims and the perpetrators. They are the protagonists and the antagonists. A woman leads the investigation into the occurrence at the house. Women imprison Anna. A woman leads the death cult. There are men in this movie, but they are mostly nameless and occupy background roles. I like the use of a mostly female cast because it allows us to examine some tropes that aren't typically done by women in film. Anna, for example, is implied to be following and helping Lucy because she has romantic feelings for her. This is foreshadowed as children, where Anna takes a special interest in Lucy that is initially framed as the affection of a child, which it well could be, and when Lucy is barricading the door of their bedroom so that she can sleep soundly, Anna's first instinct is to offer to share a bed. Obviously, this isn't predatory, like they're both children, but in context later down the line, it could be taken that Anna befriended Lucy because she had a crush on her. After murdering the family, Anna helps Lucy drag them into the bathroom. Whilst surrounded by the corpses of her torturers and their children, and bearing the open slashings and cuttings of the ghost woman, filthy and crying, Lucy hugs Anna and Anna responds by kissing her. It's a full mouth kiss that she does with so much confidence that you can assume she thinks Lucy will return it without question. Instead, Lucy just goes, "What are you doing?" During a phone call with her own mother, a woman she hasn't spoken to in years, Anna's mother calls Lucy a bitch and a pervert, asking Anna if she's still chasing her around. It's possible that they're estranged because Anna's mother doesn't support her being gay, but it's not confirmed. Either way, it appears that Anna's mother blames Lucy for Anna's homosexuality, hence calling her a pervert, but Lucy doesn't seem interested in Anna at all in that way. All of that blame is projected onto her nonetheless. Combine that with the fact that Anna doesn't actually believe any of what Lucy's told her, and we have a pairing that begins to feel a bit sleazy. We don't learn enough about Anna's real feelings to justify any broad judgment of her character, but I have to say, it is not a good look that she is chasing a woman she fundamentally fundamentally doesn't really respect the trauma of, paying a lot of lip service to, in the hopes that Lucy will return her romantic feelings once she is done with her current issues. And in the end, it is Anna's betrayal that tips Lucy over the edge and causes her to kill herself. I think having a woman in this role instead of a man is an interesting subversion that works almost like a twist because of the way Anna's intentions taint this initial impression of childhood best friendship. There are different intentions under the covers, for her at least, and it means that Lucy is in this situation where, retroactively, we can see that her support system had ulterior motives. The cult claims that only women, not men or children, have the tolerance of pain required to undergo this alleged process of martyrdom, and this violence is put on them by other women. To some viewers, this will be a flimsy excuse to torture exclusively women on screen, and like I said, I won't argue with that. It is what it is. But this is also where I feel like debates about the entitlement we have to women's pain is at its most potent. The fact that, like, IUD contraception is almost always inserted without local anesthetic in procedures that cause women to faint in agony because their womb entrance has to be forcibly opened to get the IUD in. Doctors, both male and female, will often shame women for asking for pain relief, despite this procedure being agony. Like, I have 2 female friends that have gone through the IUD contraceptive procedure, and they both said it was the most painful thing that has ever happened to them, and one of them ended up in the emergency room when it got infected. But this indicates that women in power will uphold those same patriarchal expectations on younger and less powerful women, especially because these older women are now beyond childbearing age and in menopause, and obviously no longer have to now face the same miseries. Society will also heavily judge women who use pain relief during childbirth or have cesareans because there's something ridiculously elitist about doing it without, like you've not done it properly if you've used any kind of medical assistance. It's like telling a Dark Souls player you summoned for a boss, like they completely write you off. The same goes for things like breastfeeding versus bottle feeding. Society, and more specifically Facebook mums, will shame and judge women who take easier routes that have been specifically designed to make these things easier because they're not doing it properly, and it doesn't count when you do it that way. The expectation society has is that women will endure incredible pain just for the sake of enduring pain. Anything less is cheating or dishonest. Cheating by skipping the hard parts, removing the risk, and also cheating society of getting to watch that pain happen and to grieve that it does, even when it could be avoided. When abortions are criminalized, even abortions that save a mother's life, it is more important to these institutions that women die than it is to budge on their personal beliefs and convictions, even if those personal beliefs never have to be put to the test. Elderly female politicians no longer have any skin in the game, and yet they will vote against the interests of their younger peers in volume. Even in situations where abortion is permitted, the red tape required to pass an abortion is often designed to stall the process so long that women cannot access proper medical care anyway. The state would rather watch a dead woman incubate a baby than save that woman from death. And that is exactly what Martyrs makes me think of. The way that the Mademoiselle lingers on the emphasis on young women when describing the perfect subjects for martyrdom demonstrates a system she is well outside of. She is quite literally the epitome of not my problem decision making. Some people have called this movie torture porn, and I think you could argue that pretty well. Like, I won't say that it isn't, I'm not gonna fight you. The latter 30 minutes are pretty much non-stop, exhaustive, sequential scenes of torture, and like I said before, the wrong person will be served pretty well by that regardless of the film's artistic intent. But I don't think the film would have done such a good job of forcing the audience to confront that kind of physical violence if the genre hadn't been done and then subverted in such a way. The film hammers this home at the 1 hour mark, where the Mademoiselle has a conversation with the newly imprisoned Anna. The woman basically explains that they've tried to martyr countless women over the years, but most of them fail and die because of the torture. Essentially, you go one of 2 ways. You either die from the agony and the deprivation and the suffering, or you accept it and become able to transcend to martyrdom. There have only been a few confirmed martyrs over the centuries. The Mademoiselle disdainfully refers to those who can't attain martyrdom as victims. Not in the literal actual sense where she acknowledges that she is creating victims by killing people, like, the reality of the situation, but she uses the term victim as a derogatory term towards women who can't handle the unending, unimaginable pain of torture over sustained periods of time. She uses the word victim to disparage women for being too weak to overcome torture and attain martyrdom. She encourages Anna not to be a victim. Being a victim is, to her, being a failure. You're only useful if you learn to accept how you're being treated when you stop fighting and just let go. One of the most interesting inclusions of this all-female cast is in the blonde women. More specifically, as we learn, the family that tortured Lucy is the same family that she kills, although this isn't initially certain. We are led to believe, for a short period, that Lucy has killed the wrong family through an impulsive mistake. Side note, but one of the details I liked here is that the interior of the house is all white. It looks like an IKEA showroom or some vague, non-personalised set for a bridal shoot, and it turns out that this is the case because this house is not designed to be lived in for long, nor by the same family each time. It's a showroom because it is a showroom, a facade that hides the grisly basement below. The keeper of each house and each family unit isn't the father but the mother, and the women that are chosen to keep the house are always blonde. The man can look however, but the women must always be blonde. One interesting confirmation of this is the way that in the opening credits, Lucy hits and runs away from a little blonde girl that wants to be her friend. The film is adamant on demonstrating that blonde women are heavily associated with this organisation. The man and woman of the household take on specific roles, which we learn more about when Anna is captured and begins the process of martyrdom. The man comes down at intervals and beats the shit out of her. The woman comes down and force feeds her this awful cold green slop that Anna struggles to physically keep down even if she's hungry enough to eat it. The woman changes her bucket and roughly washes her in icy cold water, and if Anna acts out, the woman slaps her until she settles again. Only when Anna begins to accept her fate, settle into the pain and make peace with her existence, the final stage before martyrdom, the woman changes her approach. She strokes Anna's hair and whispers reassurances to her that her pain will be over soon. They hold hands, and then Anna is taken to the adjacent room to be skinned alive. There's a weird maternity in these blonde women. Lucy seems to have a complicated relationship with her torturer. She sleeps in the daughter's bedroom of all places after killing the family, and when she kills the mother, Lucy kisses her face and cries over her, asking, "How could you do that to me?" There's something really complicated here that we are left to sit with. After Anna is skinned alive, the man torturing her heads upstairs, has a shower, and meets his wife in the living room. She asks how Anna is doing, and with an odd amount of pride and affection, the man goes, "Yeah, she's bearing up amazing," like he hasn't been beating her senseless for weeks or months already. The word bearing also evokes the image of pregnancy. The woman that tortures Lucy is called Gabrielle, drawing parallels to angels, heavenly messengers, and in this case, envoys of suffering. Specifically, the angel Gabriel, the Annunciator, who told Mary that she was pregnant. When Gabrielle is murdered, she is immediately replaced with another blonde woman whose name I didn't catch. This serves a double twist. At first, it's implied that Lucy killed the wrong person, and then we realise that Lucy did kill the right person, and then we realise that it never mattered in the first place. The woman that ruined her life was produced on an assembly line and is replaced immediately. There's something miserably real about the hugely cathartic end-of-journey event that is Lucy's violent revenge being scrubbed away in moments and replaced. The blood is wiped away, the corpses are buried, and a new family is moved in to continue the systemic torture exactly as the ones before them. The interchangeability of abusers and violence is really intentional here. In fact, are they all called Gabrielle? Was it actually a coincidence? Does present Gabrielle share a name with past Gabrielle? It's unlikely considering Lucy recognises the smell of her abuser, but maybe they are interchangeable. Maybe Gabrielle is a title each new woman takes on. And this brings us to the discussion of organised religion, which this movie does an incredible job at really reaching into and pulling the wiring out of. Not in the sense that it suggests that organised religion is always bad, but in the way that people in power can hijack religion and belief for the sake of their own entitlement. The bottom line of this cult is that they want to see what happens when you die. To do that, you have to martyr someone by pushing them to the end of their physical and psychological limits through weeks of torture, stripping their humanity away until there is nothing left to do but die, or accept your pain and become a martyr. At this point, you are put through one final torture. Something is done to you that will kill you in agony, more agony than anyone can ever comprehend, and in that space you transcend. You're able to see what's waiting for you, and then you are able to communicate that to someone before you die. So obviously, one of the biggest questions happens with martyrs is, do they really see what happens, or is their mind so broken by torture that they hallucinate something instead? And the answer to that is, we don't know. And therein lies the problem. One, that this cult feels like they deserve to know what happens when you die. This is something that happens to everyone. Everyone will know eventually what waits beyond death. To assume that you deserve to know is already an interesting attitude to have. Two, this cult feels like they deserve to torture people into a state of martyrdom. None of them want to be martyred, obviously, like they want to keep living. They deserve the knowledge, but none of the risks. They want their cake and they want to eat it too. This is the ultimate selfishness. And three, even if they do manage to help a poor victim attain martyrdom, the information that person can share is never confirmed to be true, and they have no way of knowing whether it's true. This adds to the shared delusion of the cult. They unquestioningly take on the testimony of people who have been tortured so horribly that they can see visions of cockroaches on their skin, or end up haunted by ghosts of previous victims as gospel. You could well be torturing women to death over and over again for the slim chance that one might turn around and blurt some bollocks in your ear. Martyrs pretends to pose this question of what did she see and was it real? But answering that question doesn't bring us any closer to catharsis, because what she saw is secondary to the story and its themes. If she said, I saw that you can go to heaven, but there's only 100 spots left, that would explain why the woman immediately goes and kills herself, but I don't think we'd find that much resolution as an audience, or at least not as much as we assume we would. I think the real question Martyrs asks is, do you deserve to know what happens when we die? And furthermore, do you deserve to kill other people for that knowledge? The answer to both is a demonstrable no. The irony of Anna's martyrdom is laid bare in the Catholic themes of the movie. The term martyr is broadly known today as a person who voluntarily suffers death as the penalty for declaring belief in and refusing to renounce a religion, or a person who sacrifices something of great value, and especially life itself, for the sake of principle, or just to inflict agonizing pain on. All of which are true in some capacity across the runtime of this movie, especially if you consider I believe I should be allowed to live without being tortured, a personal belief that Anna eventually gives up. The idea is that martyrs set aside their selfish wants and die at the hands of their torturers, despite being flayed or burned alive, because essentially they refuse to give their killers the satisfaction of seeing them cry and beg. But back in the day, and as specified at the end of this movie, martyr came from a Greek word meaning witness or testimony, and there were specific kinds of martyrs: blue, white, and red. Pascal Laugier was explicit in how his interest in Catholicism fueled this story. According to the IMDb trivia page for this film, so take it with a pinch of salt, he has called this movie a very Catholic process, in which he wanted the audience to feel real pain and share it as part of an honest process of communion. He commented that the Western world is sick. Horror cinema allowed me to express this in a very direct way. Martyrs is almost a work of prospective fiction that shows a dying world, almost like a pre-apocalypse. It's a world where evil triumphed long ago, where consciences have died out under the reign of money, and where people spend time hurting each other. It's a metaphor, of course, but the film describes things that are not far from what we experience today. Still, his Catholic inspiration isn't so cut and paste simple. Our old friend over at Room 207, who I've referenced a few times over the course of this channel, counters with the argument that, for all that, the film explicitly denies a Catholic interpretation. It's not about Catholicism, it just abuses Catholic iconography. The cult explicitly doesn't care about belief, and here's where the double bluff about the protagonist comes in. Because while they want to know what lies beyond so passionately that they'll force martyrdom on an innocent, the religious part of it has been boiled down to this: the pain is the point. I really like this argument, and I totally agree. Often when you see people discuss this film, they're like, but it's so contradictory that they say they're religious, but they actually just torture people? Why would she kill herself after finding out the truth? And the answer is, because it's a cult. It's a Catholic-inspired cult. Beyond nailing people to wood and calling it martyrdom, there's little this organization actually has in common with organized religion. The pain is the point, because the pain is what is being critiqued, and religion is used as a storytelling crutch to drive that plot forwards. If we knew more about the cult's driving doctrine, we might might have more insight here. I don't know if it's insight we'd need per se, but there's nothing wrong with learning more. As it is so far, we could only theorize on their core beliefs. Heaven's Gate didn't believe they were killing themselves just to kill themselves. They believed that they were joining that asteroid and ascending to heaven. In Jonestown, Jones viewed the mass death as an act of revolution. And consider Nexium, not a death cult, and it functionally was Keith's project to rape as many women as possible, but even this had its own mythology behind it. Cults always tell themselves something, even if the founder or leader knows it's a farce, and we actually don't know what the core religious belief of this cult is. That's always left in the air for us to theorize on. The final theme I want to talk about is one I take absolutely zero credit for. I've seen the concept of becoming woman discussed a few times in context to this film, and I felt myself physically deflate when I saw it was a Deleuzian idea. Deleuzian ideas refer to the works of Gilles Deleuze, a French philosopher from the 1950s. I tried to read his book, Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia, for last year's Marxist analysis of Dark Souls, but I gave up after about 20 pages. To me, it's borderline unreadable. It does that annoying thing that a lot of highbrow academic works do, where it makes absolutely no effort to be readable. It gatekeeps its knowledge by making it inaccessible to anyone who doesn't already write at that level. If you read this, hats off to you. When I tried to read this, I was sitting at the kitchen table reading it aloud to myself, and I still had no idea what he was trying to communicate. So I'm going to try to describe this as best as I can, but I want to emphasize that this section is a jumping off point for you to do your own research. I want to show you that I at least considered this, and I want to give this a good running go at describing and discussing, but I don't think I've nailed the core tenets of what he's trying to say, and you should absolutely take this with a pinch of salt and use it to do your own research if you're interested. So, to Deleuze, the social default is man. Like Pac-Man is a yellow circle, but Miss Pac-Man is a yellow circle with a pink bow. Stitch is an alien, and Angel is a pink alien with furry yiddies. Being the default is static, unchanging, and boring. To deviate from that, you have to be less man. Any gender expression that isn't man is, therefore, becoming woman, because any deviation from the default is seen as feminine. It's not being a woman, it's becoming woman. It's a state of change and transition. Essentially, the concept of becoming is a process of destabilizing the identity of woman. This doesn't mean you are to act like a woman, that's exactly the opposite. It's actually a deconstruction of the masculine and feminine, a destruction of meaning, an end to the division between man and woman as we have defined it socially. The act of becoming is in some ways an act of liberation, and in other ways it is not. It's not becoming woman, it's becoming woman. Do you see the difference? The state of becoming woman involves deterritorialization of personhood, i.e. the undoing of personhood. We see this with Anna, whose hair is shaved, a common method of dehumanizing victims, as many Holocaust academics will be able to attest. She is starved until she loses weight and shape, and eventually her skin and breasts are literally taken from her, creating a genderless, undone figure that has nothing left inside to fight. She is stripped of identity and made unrecognizable. We see this also through the way she is beaten. Everything about her is undone. Her personhood, her pain, her body. She becomes a surface. She is fed green slop until she tolerates it, undoing her personal preferences and tastes. She stops fighting. She starts to pee in a bucket, signaling her loss of privacy and personal boundaries. She is becoming woman in the sense that she is stripped open and laid bare. This links to the Deleuzian concept of body without organs, which he actually outlines in Anti-Oedipus on page 7. Thankfully, so I did read this far. Still, according to Anti-Oedipus, body without organs has nothing whatsoever to do with the body itself or with an image of the body. It is the body without an image. I think body without organs is confusing because it literally evokes the mental image of a human body, and therefore it does make you imagine things on an individual basis, or you imagine it on a small scale, but really a body can relate to anything. It might be better explained as body without organization, like a world of raw materials and capital and creative energy, but without any structures or society or hierarchy to funnel it through. Essentially, and as far as I understand the concept, Anna's torture is her process of becoming woman, and her final flayed state is her body without organs. Obviously, there is this literal sense of that, like she has lost her largest organ, her skin, but also in the abstract sense, she has been reduced to pain. There is nothing left of her personhood that can be measured except intensity. In this way, she reflects Deleuzian ideas. Using women specifically, undoing women for the purposes of martyrdom, is a potent symbol in Martyrs. Like I said, this section comes with a big asterisk. I am confused by this, but I am willing to try. Again, use this as a jumping off point to frame your own understanding, and feel free to correct me on my interpretation and or discuss this further in the comments. Overall, was it good? Yes. Martyrs is one of the best extreme horror films I've ever seen, and certainly the best story in extreme horror that I've experienced in a long time. It builds alongside genuine twists and turns, critiquing systems of religion and government throughout its runtime. I think there's a lot to dig into here. Pascal Laugier did a great job in constructing a narrative that levied damning critiques towards the way society feels entitled towards women's suffering, utilising a cast of incredibly talented, inspired women to achieve those goals. I honestly feel like there's a serious feminist undercurrent to this movie despite, and maybe even because of, its bold-faced depictions of violence towards women. It has been probably one of the best horror movies I've seen in a while, and in a way it's a shame that it's so often relegated to discussions of extreme horror, because it is way more than blood and guts. At the end of the day, however, this movie's gonna be an acquired taste, and I respect anyone that feels too burned by watching women suffer to sit through a movie that focuses entirely on the way women suffer, just because its message is women suffer. Still, if you think you could stomach 80 minutes of a movie with a scene so extreme that it's ended up on the same kind of lists as a Serbian film, Sallow, and the Human Centipede trilogy, this is probably the best one you're gonna see.